So let's talk about Euroleague, more specifically the Final Four, and let's start from Olympiacos against Fenerbahce. It was a wire-to-wire win for Olympiacos, and they demonstrated once again that this year might be really this time Olympiacos year. But I want to start with your considerations about this very intense and very physical game.
Yes, it was not the most beautiful game at all that we have seen this year, especially in the first minutes. There were both of the two teams that were not scoring at all. Then Olympiacos changed the pace and started to score a little bit of some baskets, while Fenerbahce, both in the first and the second quarter, was very poor from the offensive field, and they were not scoring at all for about 6 or 7 minutes, both in the first and second quarter. So basically, the game ended there because Olympiacos earned a major differential point in the scoring, and that was partly because of the fire starting by Dorsey in the first quarter, and in the second quarter by Peters, which were scoring Dorsey three pointers in the first quarter, and Peters 2 3-pointers and 2 baskets from the post ups. Basically, Fenerbahce seemed to suffer the physicality by Olympiacos, even though they were much taller than Zalgiris, as we have talked in the preview. Olympiacos seems to be more aggressive and more physical, even though in the first 2 quarters that were the most important ones in this match, then they were called more falls to the Fenerbahce team rather than Olympiacos. So it was quite strange to see that even though Olympiacos seemed to be much more aggressive with World Cup, with also Papanikolaou and the other players from the bench in Ward, especially also the Baldwin was in full trouble, and also Cambridge. In the third and fourth quarter, Jasikevicius tried to change a little bit of the lineups, so we didn't see Cambridge or any other pure center in the rotation after that, and it was decided to play with Melli or either Jantunen as the center position as a 5, or both together on the court. That changed a little bit of the match. So we have seen Milutinov a little bit in difficulties for changing in the switching and everything, while obviously Tyreek Jones was defending very good, but with poor offensive impact. So the match was not like, as I said before, the most beautiful we have seen, but it was also because of the pressure. Fenerbahce seemed to suffer a little bit of because of that. So they didn't have any offensive player to give the ball to, and to act as the blue guy, the go-to guy to impress the others. So Talen Orto-Tucker, Wade Baldwin, they didn't play so good, and the last thing that I want to add to our conversation is that both Jantunen and Melli, which were the keys to the game to open the space, they scored just 1 out of 10 threes. And the 3 that was scored by Melli, it was with 39 seconds remaining on the court. So basically, it was very hard to play like that. I don't know what's your impression about that, but
yeah, you unpacked a lot of things, like the bench difference between these two teams. In fact, Olympiacos scored 40 points off the bench, while Fenerbahce scored only 18. And this was also something that we highlighted during the Fenerbahce against Žalgiris series, and it was something that was also brought in this Final Four. You correctly mentioned Alec Peters' impact on this game and his almost perfect performance on the floor. And you also mentioned the fact that Jasikevicius had a kind of strange rotation in terms of big men. And let's give ourselves our flowers, because the preview was pretty spot on, as Papanikolaou started the game, as we said, and Chris Silva was immediately tried as a power forward on Sasha Vezenkov. It didn't really work because Vezenkov is obviously probably the best player in Europe, and also because Silva has a limited offensive skill set, but the idea was certainly there, and I honestly appreciated it. So it would have been the same thing that I would have done in Saras's shoes. But you also mentioned the fact that these two teams switched a lot on defense, and that is something typical for Fenerbahce, but it's not something very typical for Olympiacos. But I think that Nikola Milutinov did a great job in staying in front of the Fenerbahce's guards. And one thing that I really appreciated about Olympiacos' defense is the fact that they shrink the floor as much as they could, and that led to some open three-point shots, but Fenerbahce couldn't knock them down, as they shot 22.2% from the three-point line. And at the same time, a player like Talen Horton-Tucker couldn't make some of his usual drives to the basket because of this shrinked floor by the Olympiacos defense. So that was, I think, a really great game plan designed by Bartzokas. And one last thing that I want to add about the three-point percentage of Fenerbahce is the fact that they obviously need some shooters, and this game was the perfect demonstration of it. When Nando De Colo got on the floor, the fact that they need shooters was really evident, because De Colo is a great shooter, but just having one great shooter on the floor made a great difference in Fenerbahce's offensive possessions. So imagine having multiple reliable shooters. Devon Hall obviously had a bad shooting night. You mentioned also Jantunen, Melli, who didn't shot particularly well, but in general they are not very reliable three-point shooters. So I think that in this off-season, Fenerbahce will need to add some perimeter threats. And another thing that I think that they'll have to add is obviously playmaking, because Fenerbahce is going in a direction where they want to play with wings and with centers, so no point guards, no weak links to attack on defense, and that's okay. But I think that they need playmaking. Horton-Tucker and Baldwin can do like secondary ball handlers for some parts of the game, but they cannot be primary ball handlers, they cannot be passers, they cannot run many pick and rolls. So even if it means signing a point forward or a playmaking center, they need someone who can do the playmaking job. Even if it is, I don't know, Trevion Williams or someone like him, I think that they need to sign someone that can handle the ball, that can pass the ball, that can make the biggest reads, and that can solve these problems when they face this particular type of defense that they have faced against Olympiacos. So the last thing that I want to say is that Olympiacos first sweeping Monaco and then beating Fenerbahce in the Final Four, and these were probably the two worst possible matchups in terms of fit that this team could have faced, shows how really mature and good and ready this team is to finally bring, in my opinion, the championship game home.
Let me add also another couple of things that you mentioned before about the two players that impressed me the most in the Fenerbahce team. While obviously Olympiacos, all the players played very good. especially maybe as I said before, Dorsey in the first quarter. In the second quarter was Peters. In the third quarter was Vezenkov with 13 points. And in the end, there were some defensive plays from Tyson Ward that were outstanding. But on the other side, the only two players that, despite a loss of 18 points, there were a positive plus minus, were the two that you mentioned also before, that were Tarik Biberovic and Nando De Colo. Biberovic demonstrated, showed that even if a clear game by his team, he could show that he's a reliable 3-point shooter, and that is enough good to build his own shot alone, with no help by his own teammates. And Nando De Colo, he impressed me how he displayed and gave not so many assists, but organized the game, the offensive game for Fenerbahce, and also gave a little sprint to the bench, which it wasn't for him. We wouldn't have seen anything like that. So also because of them, there were a game that with just Baldwin and Devon Hall and Talan Otataker, in my opinion, they would have scored many less points than 61. That is not very much. I think it's lowest for Fenerbahce this year. But even though they could have scored like 50 points or whatever. So yeah, that's my opinion.